We remembered the recording this time. That's a really important piece. So just please know if you are showing yourself on camera, I believe it just records the screen, the video of the screen. So, but we are doing a recording and we'll share that with everybody afterwards. So I want to welcome everyone. I'm Kim Carter, Executive Director of Q.E.D. Foundation. I am so pleased to be joined by Paul Yellin and Betsey Bradley. We're very happy to have you with us today for this 1-hour webinar, Observations and Opportunities, Supporting Your Learners in Remote Learning. Whether you're supporting your children's learning at school or at home, some combination of the two, you have a notable opportunity in this context to have a window into their learning process. The truth is you watch your learners all the time, and you watch your own children all the time. You've been watching them from the first moment you met them. It just isn't always about academics. You may be watching for behavior, you may be watching for interactions, you may be watching to see if they look like they're tired or happy or what's going on with them. But in today's context, we have some opportunities to observe our learners in ways that we don't always when we have a full classroom in a regular setting every day. So we're looking forward to talking about what some of these how we can take advantage of these opportunities for observation in perhaps a new way. But first, we'd like to get to know a little bit about you and the children that you work with, the learners that you work with. So I'm going to launch a poll just to find out what grade levels you work with. Hopefully you can all see that poll now. And if you would, you can vote for more than one. So if you work with children at all grade levels, you can click on multiple grade levels. But please select which ones, which ages you work with. Betsey, can you see the poll okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, because I don't have any answers coming in, so I was just wondering.
Yeah,
I see
people are voting.
Yes,
they're voting. It's coming through.
All right, so it's just on my end that I can't see it. That's good. That's why I have a team here working with me. Let me know when everybody's voted, because it's just showing me nothing.
Yeah, you got one more person.
Okay.
You're good.
All right, I'll end the poll and share the results. Are you seeing something other than I am?
Yes.
Mine just shows 0. All right, somebody tell me what we've got, because my screen is not giving me the results.
So we have kindergarten and under, we have about 69%. Grades
Nice.
1 through 3, 69%. Grades 4 through 8, 85%. And grades 9 through 12, 46%.
Excellent. That's a nice mix. That's very good. Betsey, can you do me a favor and take a quick screenshot of that? Because I can't see it, and I'd love to be able to see that. But in the meantime, are you good?
Got it. Okay.
And I'll stop sharing the poll. Thanks, everybody, for giving us your feedback on that. So, yeah, we should be go to the next slide. So the fact is human beings begin learning before birth. They start engaging with sensory input while they're still in the womb, and that's laying foundations for learning to come. As biologist James Bell says, learning is simply what the brain does. Biologically, we exist to survive, and our primary means for that is learning. And that's so that we can control our environment to minimize pain or danger and maximize pleasure. It really comes down to this. If we weren't learning, we'd be dead. The fact that we're alive means we're all good learners already. Now, we're not necessarily all good learners in the same way, and we don't need to be. And to a large extent, our context determines whether our assets or our challenges are leading. We adults have the ability, we like to say response ability, to create contexts where every learner shines and to develop agency in learners to manage their own context. The Q.E.D. Foundation and the Yellin Center share 4 guiding principles, which are: we're all learners with aspirations and passions which deserve to be supported in every way possible. Learning changes lives by helping us develop the will, knowledge, skill, and capacity to achieve our aspirations. Learning needs to happen in different ways, so we use various strengths and resources to engage with the world around us. And learning empowers us to co-create our public world and to shape the decisions that impact our lives. I'm very happy to introduce Paul Yellin, the director of the Yellin Center for Mind, Brain, and Education.
Thank you, Kim. So when we think about observing our children, I also want us to unlearn some of the ways we've been used to observing kids, because quite often we almost automatically come to conclusions based on what we see. And our goal is to purge our minds of preconceived conclusions or notions and watch our children without judging what we're seeing. It reminds me of a student that was referred to me a few years back. He was 6 years old, and the referral from the school was that he keeps on calling out in class and he's impulsive and we think he has ADHD, and could you put him on medication, Dr. Yellin? And so this little guy walks into my office and I sat down with him and I said, so I have a question for you. He goes, what's that? I said, has anybody ever asked you why you call out in class all the time? He goes, no, they don't care. They just want me to stop. And I said, well, I'll tell you a secret between you and me. I don't care if you stop. I just want to know why you call out in class all the time. He goes, it's easy. I'm afraid I'll forget it if I don't say it. So he had some problems with what we call working memory, it turns out. I said to him, well, did you ever think of writing stuff down? And he looked at me like I had said something profound. He furrowed his brow and he said, you know something? I think that might work. He didn't need a prescription pad. He needed a notepad. But had I not asked him what his behavior meant to him, as opposed to sort of judging what it meant to me, I would have lost that opportunity to really observe him in an open way. And what we want to talk today about is understanding kids in that way and beginning to use that to understand their strengths and challenges. And, you know, we've often been taught to think about kids in fixed categories with fixed labels. Is it a gifted learner? Are you a typical learner? Are you a learning disabled child? And, you know, a few years back, somebody was sizing me up to decide whether to bring their child to me. And they said, so how am I going to explain to my kid how you think about learning? And I said, well, you know, athletes understand our approach the best, because you can be a world-class tennis player and have a great forehand and not such a great backhand. And she said, you know, that's really the way it is. Turned out, and I didn't know this at the time, but she was a tennis coach. And I said, you know, she said, I'm a tennis coach. And I said, I guess I must sound like an idiot. And she goes, actually, you're right. She said, you know, there's actually a world famous tennis player who's been #1 in the world who doesn't have a great backhand and has a great forehand. And I guess if his coach has said to him, you've got a backhand disability, you better work on your backhand all the time, that wouldn't be helpful. He works on his forehand, and obviously his backhand is, I'm sure, better than mine. But what she said to me is he hits 80% more forehands than the opposition, and he's really good. So I'm going to talk about, obviously, minds and strengths and challenges. But when we talk about minds and strengths and challenges, we're not talking about forehands and backhands. So let him tell you a little bit about that. You're muted.
I was having a good time here by myself. Okay. So many different brain processes influence how we learn. And based on a broad synthesis of research on the mind and learning, there are 8 categories that have been identified for our framework. We call it the NeuroDevelopmental Framework for Learning, and it provides a way to better understand learning and learning variation. This framework has been used by thousands of educators, clinicians, and others to better meet the learning needs of individual students. And the NDFL, NeuroDevelopmental Framework for Learning, is the basis for Q.E.D. and the Yellin Center's work empowering learners to find success. The 8 NDFL categories are constructs. We call them constructs because they're categories that are organizing what we know about how the brain works. The first is attention, and that includes maintaining mental energy, processing incoming information, and regulating work and behavior. Second is higher order cognition or complex thinking, comprehending concepts, generating original ideas, and using logic. Language is another one, and this includes understanding spoken and written information as well as communicating ideas orally and in writing. Memory is certainly a big one, but there are different kinds of memory, and Paul mentioned this a little bit and when he was talking about the young person who was sent to him originally for medication, but that includes mentally holding as well as storing and then retrieving information. Another category or construct is neuromotor functions. These involve controlling movement, so coordinating muscles, both large muscles, such as in our legs, and small muscles, like in our fingers and our hands. There's social cognition, or getting along with others. This involves cooperating with others effectively, managing social interactions, and nurturing positive relationships. Then we have temporal sequential thinking, keeping track of time and order, understanding and generating sequenced information, as well as organizing time and schedules. And another construct, our final construct, is visual spatial thinking. This is understanding and generating visual information, and it encompasses organizing materials and spaces. Betsey Bradley, Q.E.D's community director, and a parent involved in her child's learning, has a story to share about her work with her son.
Thanks, Kim. As part of my day, I'm supporting my son in his learning. He is a 7th grader who hates to write. When he would write something like a story or essay, they were usually short and lacked any type of structure. This was puzzling at first because he could have a discussion about the writings or even tell a story without any issues. But as soon as he started to put it on paper, he would just freeze.
So one thing that strikes me what struck me when I heard Betsey talk about her observation of her son was that she noticed something that he was good at. She noticed really the contrast between how well he speaks and how difficult writing is for him. And that's such an important starting point, I believe. And it's so easy for that not to happen, right? We often will talk about our kid as lazy or what they can't do, and he can't write, and he hates to write. And but by sort of starting with a strength, I think 2 things happen. One is, a really important thing, is that we're not seeing the child as a problem. We're seeing the child as a person who has things that are strong and things that are not as strong. But the other thing is that it's sort of looking at the contrast between something he's good at and something that's hard for him helps us begin to understand, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between oral language and writing? And so let's look at that for a second and say, well, it's so natural to say, well, he can speak, but he can't write. And quite often we look at things that seem to be the same thing that our child is good at and something that seems to be related that they're not good at, and we attribute meaning to it instead of stepping back and saying, well, wait a second, what's the difference between speaking and writing? Because they're both ways of transmitting what we know and what we think and our ideas and our knowledge. But what Betsey is saying to us is our child has great ideas and he's really good at expressing himself. So that when we think about the writing process, we can look and say, well, think about it as a series of funnels. And the first narrowing point in the funnel for some kids is turning their ideas into their words. Well, that's not Betsey's son's challenge. So we know that that is an area that is probably working well. So we begin to ask ourselves, well, what's the difference between speaking and writing? What happens? Because as we think about understanding Betsey's son's difficulty, number one is we want to reinforce where those strengths are, and we want to discover what challenges, what's getting in the way for him. So I'm curious, Betsey, did you ask him what he thinks what does he think is going on, and what is he experiencing when he tries to write?
Yes, I did. He would become frustrated and he would just shut down. After observing this a few times, I knew something was going on. We sat down together and I shared what I was seeing, and then I asked him how was he feeling about it. In the past, he would have said, I don't know. We've been practicing these conversations for many years now, so he was able to sit down and tell me. He told me that he gets nervous and just feels out of sorts. Everything's hit him at once and sometimes overwhelms him. He knows the information, but it just scatters. He will have issues with thinking of the words to use and trouble organizing his thoughts. It's like his ideas would just disappear.
So, that's such a powerful conversation. And, I think, whenever Betsey talks to us about her relationship with her son, I always marvel at the ability that they share in conversing with each other. But, not every parent is going to start out at that space. And so, quite often when I tell parents or urge parents to ask their child what's going on, they may say, I don't know. And they may say, I don't know, even, when I'm meeting with them. But that's not what happened here. Betsey's son talked about what was getting in the way and what was that his ideas were, he felt nervous and overwhelmed, and that his ideas kind of scattered. He couldn't organize them. They would just disappear. And the first thought that came to my mind is well, let's talk a little bit about our cognitive workspace and our what we call our active working memory, which is kind of like our cognitive working space. And so typically, let's say that you only have a certain amount of space in your brain to hold things at the same time. So handwriting may take up a certain amount of our brain space, and then focus might take up a little bit more. And now we have all the rest of our working space for the academic task at hand. Now, some kids have less working space, or sometimes what happens if, like the child that I saw yesterday, who has what we call a graphomotor problem. He has trouble writing. And suddenly, handwriting is taking up a much bigger chunk of his desk space. And he's got difficulty focusing. And so keeping his mind on the task at hand is taking more of his workspace. And suddenly, there's less space left over for the task at hand. And so that sometimes different challenges may show up by making the task we're looking at tricky. Now, how does working memory play into the writing process? Well, when I think about active working memory in kids who have difficulty with active working memory, I think back to the computer I had 10 years ago that didn't have a whole lot of RAM. And so if I tried to open up PowerPoint at the same time that I had Word, and then I decided to go to Quicken, I would get a message that you don't have enough RAM to run all those programs at the same time. You better close one of them. And so for some kids, when you have to write, you need to generate your ideas. You need to access spelling rules, vocabulary, grammar, organize your ideas and punctuation. And what I heard Betsey describe her son noticing sounded like he was struggling with limited cognitive workspace. And that can be really overwhelming for a child. And these are the kids that we see, for example, who spell beautifully on their spelling test, but are making spelling errors in the middle of their writing because they don't have enough RAM to run their spelling program at the same time that they're running their organization program. Or if they have problems with handwriting and their handwriting is taking up too much of their working space, it's kicking other things off. So thinking about where Betsey's son's breakdown might lead us to some strategies. So I'm really curious about what you guys did next.
Well, we brainstormed a list of possible things. We used the NDFL strategies as a resource, such as the Learner Sketch tool, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. Some strategies he used, he said it sounded like me or like his dad. It wasn't him at all. Some, he said, would be too much work. It took us a good full day to go through our list and pick the first 3 strategies we try. First, we decided on having a visual organizer of the writing process available for his thoughts, so he doesn't seem overwhelmed, and that way he could think about one piece of the writing structure at a time, just until it becomes a habit of mind for him. Second, he would express his ideas verbally to me, and he would record this interaction. He would then use the recording as a way to remember his ideas when preparing to write. He felt unable to do both the writing of his ideas and remembering the process at the same time. Lastly, he came up with the idea to start a nightly journal. That gave him practice on organizing his thoughts on things that may be of more interest to him.
You know, whenever I look at this picture, it makes me think about the fact that probably the goal of a session with a child who's struggling with writing shouldn't be necessarily what the writing project looks like. But I see that both Betsey and her son are still smiling. Now, how often does that happen when we work with a child through a challenging problem? But if at the end of that process, I would argue that no matter what is on the page, you're successful if you're both still smiling. That doesn't mean you failed if you're not both still smiling, because that's hard. But the other thing that I noticed and was the fact that, you know, Betsey's son, first of all, felt that he was empowered to reject strategies that Betsey had suggested because they were dad strategies or mom strategies. And so often we get into our own mindset, what works for us, and we may try to sort of force it down our child's throat because I know that that's a good strategy, but it might be a good strategy for your kind of mind, but not for your child's kind of mind. And so really listening and for him to be empowered to reject what you do without it meaning that he's rejecting you is really important. And then the other thing was that he recommended that he wanted to try something himself, which says to me that he has a growth mindset, that he really understands that by working on things that are hard for him, he can actually get better. Now, children don't all start there. Once again, you know, we're ending at a place that is an important goal, but you know, the other part, I think, of feeling that you're on the right track with the child is that you're both smiling, but also that the child feels empowered to reject a strategy that you've recommended and to come up with a strategy that you hadn't even thought of.
So here are a few observation tips that you can use to guide you through the process. First, find and focus on our child's strength. Watch their body language. Next, ask questions. Don't tell our own story about what we see. Next, listen and listen more. Even if they're not ready to describe what they need, don't jump in with our own solutions. And last, embark on a path of discovery together. There is no right answer.
So I think those tips sound great, and we've heard from people that when you start observing learners in this way, it's not always clear what to be watching for or what kinds of questions to be asking. So we want to introduce you to the Learner Sketch tool to help you with your journey of discovery. The LST, and we'll give you the website address for that in just a bit, is a free resource, and it's designed to empower dialogue between learners and adults. The tool can also provide guidance for what to pay attention to with your observations. The initial part of the tool has 8 screens. Each has 4 statements and can be used for older learners to self-report or for guided discussion with middle grade learners. The statements themselves can provide guidance for what to observe with any age learner. Betsey, I'm going to switch over real quickly to a live version of the Learner Sketch tool just to show people what those statements look like. Give me just a minute. And hopefully people can see this okay. So when you go into the Learner Sketch, can you see it, Paul?
Yep, looks good.
Oh, okay. So there are a series of screens, and again, this is a self-report. It's not a diagnostic tool, but there are these statements, and they first show up in the center, and older learners can read them and say, yeah, that is so me. I can easily recall important information and events. Or I'm not so good at organizing my belongings, and they usually can identify that. If it's middle grade learners, then you can talk through these statements with them. But regardless, the set of statements, and I believe we have 30, I'm going to say 32 of them in here. The statements can be things you can pick a couple of to focus on when you're observing. So what are the things you want to pay attention for or you want to ask questions about? Here's another set. So numbered lists help keep me on track, or I'm good at remembering multi-step processes. And I like to apply logic. So these are organized around the 8 constructs that we mentioned. And when you've gone through the whole process of sorting those statements, you get some more resources and options. And we're going to talk about those more in the next webinar, but I want to show you one more piece that's in here at this point in time. So when you get your results, it shows you both your strengths and your challenges, or it shows your learner their strengths and their challenges. Again, as a self-report, this is not a diagnostic tool. It's a place to begin conversation and to help with that observation and collaboration. So let's say they wanted to look at the fact, so in this instance, this is keeping track of time and order, and it's both a strength and a challenge. You can see that the green for strengths and the yellow for challenges are equal here. So if you click on this, the first thing that you will get is a little video and and a description of what keeping track of time and order covers. What is that all about? And you can look for some more resources at the bottom of that. As we'll go into next time, there's also a database of strategies. But what we wanted to do mostly was show you the, Betsy, can you go back to sharing the video, the PowerPoint, show you that those statements that are in there can be prompts for you to help you with your observations and with your conversation. People often want to go right to strategies, and we want to really encourage you to spend more time with the observation piece. I think there might be one more, right. So, but if you do want more information, the Learner Sketch tool is a great place to go in and dig into each of these areas, the attention, memory, language, the 8 areas that we talked about. And they're all available there. We'll dig into some of the other resources in the Learner Sketch tool in our next webinar with the strategies and the plan. But again, really hope you'll spend some time focusing on observations first. So we wanted to give you some tools for that. We are about halfway through, and what we'd like to do is pause for some questions and answers. You can type in the chat, or you have an option of raising your hand. I think it's under React. No, it's under the participants list. There's a little tool where you could raise your hand. And Betsy will respond to questions that show up in the chat, and Paul will take anybody who raises their hand and unmute you and give you a chance to state your question. Or maybe there are no questions. Should we wait another minute? Or comments or observations?
I have one question.
Okay.
Do we have any ideas for disengagement? My kids are not participating in class at all.
So I'm assuming you're a teacher. Are people trying to raise their hands and not able to?
I'm not sure.
I don't. Yes, yes. You're trying to raise your hand. So that,
I see, I do see someone,
I'm not seeing any
waving at
hands.
you. Let's see if I can do.
I'll let you know.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm not sure if we're talking about, at this point, the remote learner, or we're talking about the good old days when we were physically in a classroom observing. And I think that I've done years of observing in classrooms, but I'm not quite sure how to add that. What I think the observation is going to be a barrier, because you're watching them learning on a screen versus learning in a space where there are other children, where there's just all different types of environmental different stimuli that happen in a classroom that will not happen when you're working with a computer.
I think we're
Question.
yeah, I think we're focusing on the current situation where kids are at home, and we were thinking about, I think Betsey's situation was that, sort of ideas that parents can contribute in their observing the child. But was your question the one about kids not being engaged at all?
No, but I had a comment on that, in that, were they engaged before? What was their situation like when they were physically in the classroom? Is this new, or is this the same and just the parents are now noticing it more, or it's being brought to their attention because they're home on the computer?
I think that's a great question. And I mean, the question I ask back, and maybe because I'm a clinician and I work with individuals, but maybe not, is that it may be different for each child. But that might be an opportunity to have a conversation with the children individually, and find out what's going on with them, and noticing that they don't seem engaged, and understand. I see it from the other end, which is I see kids who have been online in school all day. And some of them having a tremendous amount of difficulty engaging. But it seems, and some kids are doing better. So I would say that the answer, might be different for different kids. A strategy that I like that seems to help for lots of kids is providing some kind of previewing, or engaging the parents and engaging the child with some advanced viewing of what tomorrow's lesson's going to be. So that they may come in with some, thinking about it, having talked about it, with some questions in advance. So some ways to do some pre-learning before they engage, so that they're coming to the session with some, some previous conversation about it, or whether you can do that yourselves. But it may be different for each of the kids in that room. I'm still not saying whether there are no hands up, or I'm just not saying hands.
So I think there might be a little bit of difficulty with raising hands. And I know Susan Foley wanted to unmute to speak to you. I will unmute you, Susan. Yes, you're unmuted, Susan.
Yeah, I mean, my issue is, and I don't know, maybe this is not the right place to address it, but I have kids who are just completely disengaged. And I don't know how to solve that problem. And so I have an entire class of 12 boys who are not participating and are not, I mean, it's honestly as if I were talking to a wall. And I just don't know how to solve their depression, or, I don't know what's going on. I can't know. They're new students. I don't know them. I think they're dysregulated in terms of time. I think they flipped. And so we have class at 9 a.m. and many of them are rolling up out of bed. And I'm sort of at my wit's end.
I'd love to hear, that can't be that's probably not an uncommon problem, right? How many folks?
Yeah, I'm assuming everyone is with that. So I'm trying
No.
opportunities to engage, and I'm starting email conversations with some of them, but that's not really working. I've done polling, and then honestly, no one fills out the poll. I mean, I just have, I mean, maybe there is no answer. Maybe
Well, no, I think, how old were
there's
how old? Sorry?
17.
17.
Mm-hmm.
Kim, do you have any thoughts?
Tools we found, one of the tools we found really helpful is Kahoot. Have you heard of Kahoot?
I haven't.
It's Kahoot with an exclamation mark. And you can design quizzes or games. So it's all, you can put the academic content in. It gives you different ways for them to kind of compete against each other. And we've found that the high school kids like the competitions, and they also like to be able to do small breakout room conversations. I don't know what tools you're using with them, but those are a couple of pieces that we found that have been really helpful. Another tool is something that's called Padlet, Padlet.
That I know. Yeah.
Okay, and I believe those are both free. We try to think of free tools first. So those are a few things, some small discussion groups or using breakout rooms or small note-taking in Google, using Kahoot, which does a lot of games. They have a variety of different kinds of game strategies that you can put academic content into, and then using Padlet as a way of getting ideas out there and getting them sharing their thoughts.
I have a question that came into the chat.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with English language learners who are stronger in their oral language, who also struggle with writing. Can you comment on NDFL and English language learners?
I think that, thinking about it through the NDFL lens, it's still, I don't know if we want to go back to that slide, but I think, if we go back to the fact that sort of turning your ideas into words. I mean, the first question I always have when I, hear this question about an English language learner is, number one is their expressive language in their first language really okay? Quite often we attribute differences or challenges in students with English as a second language to the fact that that English is their second language, but sometimes it may still be a language challenge. But let's assume that that's not the case. Let's assume that your observation, taking your observation, well, we go back to this idea of saying that turning our ideas into language is step one, and now turning it into writing is step two. And so, if we think about the limited workspace that we talked about before, if English is your second language, it may be that turning your ideas into English is not fully automatic yet. And now adding the next steps of all the other pieces of the writing process make it sort of overwhelming. So to test that hypothesis, you might want to let that child first dictate into, record the words first, separate the first part of the writing process from the second part, and sort of isolate the idea of turning the ideas into English words. Because for that child, that might be a more challenging task than somebody for whom English is automatic. And then, once again, going through the NDFL, or what I would call, for medicine, the differential diagnosis of saying, okay, now we've eliminated the barrier of getting the child's ideas into words. Now can that child play back that tape? And what's getting in the, does now writing flow? or is there something else? And if you find that the child is really struggling with dictating their ideas, then they need to sort of work on that first. But separating the turning their ideas into language from the putting the words on the page can help tease that apart, and can also help you find a strategy that's going to bypass that breakdown. And I sort of take out of my mind the fact that it's in child's in ESL. I just start from the basic principles. So saying, what are, task analyze the writing process, and where are the possible breakdowns? So I hope that's a helpful answer.
I'd like to go back to Dr. Mark's question about observation in the remote learning context, because I think that's a really important question. And actually, Paul, just before we got started here, you were sharing a story about a young man a young child you were working with. Do you mind repeating that?
Yeah, but
talking to him and.
Yeah, my work's easy, right? Because I'm talking to 1 or 2 children at a time. So we had done an assessment of a kid who had ADHD. And part of our feedback is to describe their strengths and their challenges to them. And I'm talking to him through Zoom, and he's making all sorts of horrendous faces as I'm speaking. And so I said, "Are you okay?" And he sort of startled, and he said, "I forgot you were there. I was just looking at my face on the Zoom." But it sort of opened up that conversation. And I said, "Does that happen to you a lot when you're supposed to be focusing on your teacher?" And he cracked up. And he said, "Absolutely, it happens all the time." And we talked about strategies like that. So I go back to to Susan's description, and I just think about for each of them it might be a little bit different, but maybe the whole focus of the lesson should be around engagement in this virtual world, and and why they're all having trouble connecting, and just calling them out on it and acknowledging that they're having trouble connecting. And that you're probably having trouble connecting. And maybe that could be the whole topic of the lesson. You probably have tried that already, I'm curious. But Dr. Mark, did I see you raise your hand? Or?
So, I agree with you to the point that maybe the lesson needs to be all about engagement and how to relate to the child, even when we were in classrooms. I think if we don't have the child engaged, you don't have the child's attention, they're not going to learn. So that is such an important piece of the learning process. It's not the only piece, but I think I would emphasize, as I think you are, is that the engagement is key, whether we're remotely learning or we are in a classroom. My question is for, you've been speaking about older students, older learners. What do you do with the children who are first coming into the learning process? Although that's misstated because we learn from pre-birth. Yeah. Who are first coming into the formal, let's call it the formal school years, and they're being thrown into this remote learning situation where before they were able to be in a physical classroom where you could engage them through play and things like that, that they don't yet have any of those foundations, and they don't have the ability to tell you what they're feeling.
I almost want to defer to some of my educator friends, but I have to say that I think it's a huge issue. I think it's a huge problem. I mean, my clinic has been flooded with 5- and 6-year-olds, and I don't know that they have ADHD, but they're driving their parents crazy, and they can't focus on the virtual learning. It's not really working for them, and that doesn't help anybody. But I'm just sort of putting it out there. So I would love some thoughts, because I don't honestly know, and maybe we have to think about different ways to engage these little kids, or that it doesn't work. Some of our districts are are bringing the younger kids in more and using the distance learning for the older kids, and the assumption that, you know, at least the data seems to suggest that younger kids are less likely to, you know, to transmit COVID. But I think that it's a really different issue. And I'd be lying if I said I knew the answer, because we're feeling overwhelmed. So I'm suspecting that educators and parents are as well, is by these kids for whom this is just not working. That's probably not a helpful answer, Dr. Mark. I'm sorry.
Well, Paul, I just started teaching a exploring STEM class for 4 to 7-year-olds. And I realized the only way that I can get them engaged remotely is I have to send what I'm going to cover virtually to them ahead of time. So the class is usually Wednesday. So on Monday, I have to send them, I have to go and actually search for YouTube videos or make a video myself and make it fun, where they would actually sit and watch. And the video can only be about 2 or 3 minutes. I can do multiple videos, but it have to be short videos. And then I give them the option. You can watch all of these, or you can just pick 1 or 2. And then I give them a little things to do that they can do around home. So when they come in to be with me virtually, they're ready to go into a project, and they're excited because they already know what I'm getting ready to discuss. And so I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah, with the younger ones, and I can't keep them on virtually no more than 20 or 30 minutes, because at that time you can see their attention is starting to move away. And that's been working pretty good.
And I'm just going to recognize Michael, trying to unmute. I don't think I can I? Michael, Joseph, Betsey, maybe you need to.
Yes. I'm proud to use Dr. Mel Levine's Schools Are Tuned program. I use Institute for Multiple Sensory Education for Reading Language Arts. I use Touch Math. I'm at an advantage. I am Roman Catholic. I work with the Roman Catholic Diocese of Sacramento, and our focus is on serving God. Whether they come to us, we're not a school, we're an academy. We used to be called St. Francis of Assisi School. We are an educational academy. We have kids with Down syndrome, Asperger's, dyslexia, autism. We take everybody. We have rules and regulations, but our focus in working with our kids to serve God, that's our mode and inspiration. We're not, and people don't understand this. We are in a secular society, narcissistic society, but again, I am blessed to have been trained by Dr. Mel Levine. That's my most favorite of academic methodologies. It works because the kids don't get away with murder. They don't climb the chandelier. They work their tails off, but we adapt curriculum to the modalities, and we have a curriculum. Believe me, we have history, we have geography, we have theology, Roman Catholic, reading language arts, we have foreign language, fine arts, and again, I'm not here to boast, but the problem is too many people don't know about loving and serving God. No matter what strength or weakness we have, we are here to serve our neighbors, because we may have our problems, which we do, but we have neighbors who are far worse off. And our focus is on serving God by serving our neighbors.
Thank you. That's. I'm going to unmute. I think I can unmute. I can't. So it's William Marble that we want to unmute next. I can't do that.
I got it.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Wonderful, great. So the young ones are the heartbreaker for me right now as a principal in a K-5 building that is fully remote. The 5-year-olds that are coming into school for the very first time, and having an early childhood background. I was principal at an early childhood center for 6 years prior to coming to the current building that I'm in, and the first graders too, in part because they were cut short last year in March when we went to a remote model, you know, and the demands that we have right now for live streaming, in-person instruction for even those young children aren't realistic. And I can tell you on day 8 now of the school year for us in New Jersey, we don't start until after Labor Day typically. So we started school on the 8th of September. We're on day 8, and already feeling that, you know, feeling sadness for those young ones, feeling that the model that we've put together and spent a lot of time working on over the summer as an administrative team and in committees to address what was originally to be a hybrid and then last minute became fully remote. So we're in the process of revising that and looking at developmentally appropriate expectations for screen time for live instruction. So again, left building the plane as it's flying, feeling that has become familiar again and again over the course of the last 6 months or so. But no doubt that your practice is full with 5 and 6 year olds because again they're not wired to sit in front of screen time. I mean, all of the studies, and again, I believe that most of the studies on screen time with young children are looking at, you know, kind of free use of devices rather than a structured learning environment. But nonetheless, those expectations for 5 and 6 year olds just aren't, just leave us wanting in a big way for something more appropriate. Don't know that I have answers, but just to, definitely to affirm what you're seeing and in terms of the constructs, I see a lot of value in them as I have in the past. They're familiar to me, so I appreciate that reminder of those as well. So thank you.
Thank you for your insights. Thank you so much.
Why don't we share the resources and talk a little bit about what's coming? While we're getting there, I'm just going to mention Dr. Bruce Perry has done some great stuff throughout the pandemic. His website has a lot of resources. Paul, do you remember it off the top of your head? It's neuro something. We can send it out with a follow-up.
I'm sorry.
One of the things he talks about, and this really stuck with me, is that the real little ones, the preschool kids, do a lot of parallel play when they're together. And so if you can set up like an iPad or something with a friend, so they have a play friend who's on in another place, but they can hear each other playing and occasionally go to the screen and see each other, that for the little ones, that's a way of building some connection in these really challenging times. So he had some great ideas up there too. We can send that out when we send out the follow-up resources. We do want to leave you with some resources. We know there are more questions than there are answers. One page that we'd encourage you to check out is spacesoflearning.net. You can access the Learner Sketch tool there, or you can go directly to the Learner Sketch tool through, are you clicking, Betsy? There we go, learnersketch.org. But you will also find those videos that I mentioned and some other resources at Spaces of Learning under How Do People Learn and How Do I Learn. And there's also the Yellin Center for Mind, Brain, and Education. They have a blog and they have a page full of resources. So we encourage you to check those out and take a look at those. Most of all, we want to support you as you continue this journey of discovery. And many of you on this webinar today have been with the All Kinds of Minds community, the NeuroDevelopmental Framework community. And so these 5 actions will be familiar to you, but we want to encourage people to consider that our work is about inspiring optimism in the face of learning challenges. It's about discovering and treasuring unique learning profiles, not looking for one kind, but really treasuring the range of human variation, learner variation, and eliminating humiliation, blaming, and labeling students. At the same time, we work to empower them to find success through leveraging strengths and affinities. Our next webinar will help you continue on that path of discovery, and we'll look at strategies, and in particular, we'll be looking for strategies that can support the remote learning environment. We have lots of stories and lots of anecdotes, but I think we have to be in this together so that we can think about how we support the range of needs and the limited contacts that are available to us as educators these days. The next date will be October 21st, and Betsey will send out a follow-up with a survey. We'll provide you the link to the recording and the PowerPoint presentation, and we very much encourage you to stay in touch and to keep sharing ideas with each other. These are important questions that you've raised, and we want to support you in your work. Betsey and Paul, do you have any last thoughts?
No, just thanks everybody for your attention. I know you're all busy and pulled in so many directions, so we're really grateful that you spent your afternoon, part of the afternoon with us. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you. And if you come up with any questions that maybe you didn't come up with today, please feel free to email me and we'll try to respond back with some answers.
Thank you.
Bye.
So I guess Kim left.
Did she?
Yeah.
She was supposed to, but okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, hold up, okay, hold up. She just
This gentleman is on. Let's unmute him and see if he's got a question.
okay, let's respond back to Paul.
Michael, I can't unmute you. I think
Unmute.
this gentleman down here, Michael Joseph.
I just want to thank you for your wonderful work. It works. Again, sir, as you know, we are a secular, narcissistic society, and that's one of the problems we have, because we are all, whether we are Orthodox, I'm Catholic, but whether we are Catholic or Orthodox, Jewish or Muslim, we all believe in God, and we have two hemispheres. I'm not a doctor. You are. You have the advantage. You make more money than I, but that's not the point.